Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and soon after Stonewall Jackson's Valley Campaign, a New York-based soap company called Pyle's OK Soap advertised their products with statements that the Confederate general regularly used their soap and sighed for more when it ran out. Author Robert Crick, in his essay entitled The Metamorphosis of Stonewall Jackson's Public Image in Gary Gallagher's edited volume on Jackson's Valley Campaign, argues that Jackson's status as an American icon came from his Valley Campaign in 1862. The First Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, brought Thomas Jonathan Jackson to the forefront of the American mind with the nickname Stonewall that he earned as his men battled for Henry House Hill. However, in the months following the first major battle of the Civil War, Jackson's famous stand was nothing more than a footnote, as higher-ranking commanders got more press attention, those like Joseph E. Johnston and George McClellan. In January 1862, Jackson took his little army to Romney on a miserable expedition through horrid conditions. The general's eccentricities led many of his men to see him as a lunatic. A rebellion within Jackson's army began to take form. General William W. Loring fomented a mutiny, and William B. Tolliver acted as one of Loring's biggest supporters in the mutiny, and 4 regimental commanders conspired with Secretary of War Judah Benjamin to attempt to convince Jefferson Davis to get rid of Jackson, who they saw as inept. The very existence of the Romney Rebellion speaks volumes about Jackson's lack of stature early in 1862. Even the dashing cavalry commander for Jackson in the Valley, Turner Ashby, was a harsh critic of Jackson. He said as much to his friend in the Confederate Congress. However, Jackson wasn't without his supporters. Virginia Governor John Letcher took a prominent role in silencing the politicians speaking out against Jackson, and with the politicians put down, the grumblers within the army also went silent. This all goes to show that Jackson in early 1862, even with the nickname of Stonewall, did not command the respect that he would later garner after the next few months. With the quick victories in May of 1862, the Confederacy began to focus on the Valley Campaign. A Georgia newspaper wrote, "Jackson is imparting new life to the Confederate cause by his brilliant successes and his rapid advances. He is boldly and vigorously driving the enemy before him and routing them wherever he catches them." 12 days later, as Port Republic was being fought far to the north, the same paper commented that Stonewall's policy and design to advance boldly and expeditiously, and every reported movement of his heretofore, though startling, has been confirmed. In reference to his movements, even fast-flying rumor has not been able to get ahead of him. We have to remember that all of these victories in the Valley came off a disastrous early 1862 for the Confederacy. Confederate forces had lost battles at Mill Springs in Kentucky in January, and Fort Henry and Fort Donelson fell in February. This led to Union forces taking over great portions of Tennessee. In April, Shiloh delivered a major defeat to the Confederacy. Jackson's victories in the Valley were exactly what the Confederacy needed to boost its morale after a horrible first year, and they were drawn to it. Newspapers latched onto these stories, and although attention had already been directed toward the Eastern Theater because of the Confederate capital in Richmond, Virginia, the Eastern Theater became everyone's main focus, and Jackson became a hero to the South. But as we saw with the first story, even Northerners would use the now iconic image of Jackson to sell their products. 6 days after the Battle of Port Republic, a Georgian in Robert Toombs's brigade wrote home, "The news of the gallant achievements of Stonewall Jackson was most enthusiastically received by the army here and our commanders here. When compared with Jackson's rapidity of action, are quite unpleasantly commented upon by the rank and file on the line. Jackson is the only general on our side who is fast ascending the ladder of military fame." A member of the 11th Virginia longed for the chance to serve under the new hero. "He is the man. I wish we had the whole army filled with Jacksons, and the Yankees would soon be shipped from our soil." A Georgian who fought with Jackson in the Valley wrote, "Like old Frederick the Great, Jackson fights to win and will win or die. At the same time, he is very considerate of the lives of his men. He makes his fights at the right time and in the right place. He shares the fate of the men. We are ready, for we all feel that what he does is all right." At least as significant as Jackson's legendary status in Southern eyes was the new clout that his name carried among his enemies. Federals who had never heard of Thomas J. Jackson in March feared him mightily by June. A New York lieutenant who praised Jackson as a man of decided genius in a June 12th letter, admitted that very few in our army are fit to compete with him, was expressing a widely held concern in forecasting future events in a classic bit of self-fulfilling prophecy. When another Federal, captured in June near Richmond, learned that Jackson was on hand, he exploded, "Is that devil here?" The Union soldier had heard just hours earlier that Jackson had been destroyed, at the same time that a South Carolinian defending Richmond was certain that Stonewall had crossed the Potomac to reach Washington. His status as being in multiple locations at once had instilled fear in Northerners, especially Washingtonians. The French ambassador in Washington admitted that in May, the city had great concern that Jackson could threaten the U.S. Capitol. A Hoosier referred to Stonewall as this great leader and admitted that he outgeneraled all their commanders. A New Yorker wondered in print with obvious chagrin whether his side could find a general who is as dashy and plucky as this Stonewall Jackson. General Richard Ewell, who fought under Jackson in the Valley Campaign, offered horrendous criticism of him before the campaign, calling him a lunatic, a fanatic, and at one point, an old woman. 4 weeks after he uttered those words, he asked Colonel Munford, "Do you remember when I called Jackson an old woman? Well, I take it all back." A Georgia newspaper who criticized Jackson had to smooth over their former story. Some time ago, the editors admitted manfully, "We accuse Jackson of being of unsound mind. Of late, he has exhibited not the least symptom of improvement. In fact, he gets worse and worse every day. Within the last 2 weeks, he seems to have gone clean daft. Crazy quiet, crazy as a bedbug, crazy as 2 bedbugs. He has been raving, ramping, roaring, rearing, snorting, and cavorting up and down the valley, chawing up Yankees by the thousands as if they were so many grains of parched popcorn. He may never recover his senses till his foot cavalry are stabled in the big barns of the Susquehanna Valley. Crazy or not, we but echo the voice of the whole Confederacy when we say, God bless old Stonewall and old Ewell and old Ned Johnson. God bless them 1,000 times over and all the gallant fellows they so skillfully command. God bless them all." All these accounts demonstrate that even though he had earned the nickname Stonewall, Jackson in early 1862 was not highly thought of, but after the Valley Campaign, he took on mythical status, with Northerners and Southerners alike accusing him of being in multiple places at once and being an almost unconquerable commander. Even his lackluster performance in the 7 Days Campaign did not put out his rising star. In fact, many newspapers were more willing to blame Lee for the failures during the 7 Days than Jackson. Although he won his nickname at First Manassas, his icon status came from his rapid movements up and down the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, defeating numerous Union forces in the process. Those actions are what made him a national hero to the Confederacy and a boogeyman to the Union.